Danielle Smith, guest hosting for Common Sense Calgary. We're interviewing all of the candidates for Calgary City Council in the upcoming municipal election this fall. And joining me now is Ward 11 candidate Lauren Herschel. Lauren, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's begin. Tell us a little bit about why you decided to put your name forward in Ward 11.
It's now or never, I guess. I think, we're right in the middle of the pandemic. There's lots going on with the economy. This is something I've been passionate about for a number of years. So it just sort of seemed that the stars aligned, if you will. I think you can really make the most change in times of a little bit of disruption. So I hope it's not going to get more disrupted than it currently is. And I just think, it's time for fresh ideas. It's time for, I think, a new attitude at City Hall. So I threw my hat in the ring.
You mentioned on your site that you don't think there's a place for partisan politics at City Hall. Do you think it's been partisan?
I think it can be partisan at times. And I think sometimes those viewpoints can sometimes get in the way of having just robust conversation and combining of ideas. I've seen a lot of people say things like, well, if this person votes this way on this, they're automatically going to vote these ways on these 5 other issues. And I don't think that needs to be the case. And I think when things go into extremely partisan politics, I think it really becomes sort of us versus them and team A and team B. And, that doesn't work in a boardroom in a regular business. So I'm not sure why that would work at City Hall.
Well, let's talk then about the kind of business experience you've had, because it's been quite varied, and give us some idea of how you think those experiences will make you a good city councillor.
Sure, that's a great question. So I've worked in a number of industries. I think I've worked in everything in Calgary except oil and gas. I've somehow missed that one. And I think what that's given me is really good insight into what's important to different organizations, whether that's a not-for-profit, whether that's the real estate development world, whether that's property owners downtown, and even some city partners. I'm on the board of Heritage Calgary. I worked at Calgary Public Library. So I think, I have a really good understanding of all the different, well, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the different groups that interface with the city and their needs and their approach and what they're looking for from City Hall, from administration, and from council. So I think when you have those different perspectives, it kind of gives you a bit of a leg up. You're not having to figure out how all those different partners and stakeholders work in order to make decisions.
I was interested to see, because of your work in the residential home building area, that you think that there's a way to streamline some of the red tape around construction. Can you talk a bit about some of those ideas?
Sure. So right now, for example, there's over 250 different planning policies circulating out there. That's a lot. 250, if anything, is a lot. And I think when you have that many things, automatically, like, there's going to be conflicts. There's going to be, one cancels out the other. Different departments within the city may have different interpretations, and that's going to happen normally anyways. But I think what I've seen firsthand in working for a developer is, by the time the proposal or the plan makes it through all the different stages it needs to go through, like transportation and water and the basic planning department, it's kind of like a game of telephone. By the time it gets back to the beginning, the first group is unhappy with the changes the second group made. And then you're just kind of chasing your tail, which of course costs businesses money, it costs the city money. It's really frustrating. Like, I've seen a number of people who have really put their heart and soul in trying to come up with something that's creative and really is going to add to the community. Just, kind of throw their hands up. Why are we trying to invest in the city when we're getting the runaround this way? Like, give us some clear, predictable rules that we can work within. And that'll help us plan our businesses better too. It benefits the city in that they can plan their needs more, but it also helps developers really understand sort of what field they're playing in and what they need to do to have a successful project.
Well, I am interested now then to hear what you think of the guidebook for great communities. Is that an advancement in streamlining that effort, or did it create more confusion?
No, first of all, it's part of the puzzle, right? And planning is a puzzle. There's a lot of different pieces, and it doesn't work as a whole without all of those pieces. So the guidebook is one piece. And it really has no teeth until there's a local area plan involved. That said, what it does do is it does create certainty, not just for developers, but for communities as well. So they can understand, okay, this is what could go here, not necessarily what will go here, but what could go here, and here's what can't. And it's the same thing for developers and even for the city. It takes a lot of that interpretation of all these different policies out of the hands of different people, because the way I interpret something could be completely different than the way you interpret it. And if you're the planner in the north and I'm the planner in the south and we have identical projects, we could have different outcomes, and that shouldn't happen. So the guidebook is good in the sense that it does streamline some of those many policies. Of course, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all the world's problems or all the city's problems, but it does streamline things that way. So there are a lot of benefits to the guidebook, but I do also appreciate that there are some downsides as well.
Yeah, I think what you're hearing, especially from those communities that are zoned R1 and they're single family homes, I think they're worried about big condo developments going in across the street from them. Do you think that's a legitimate concern, or do you think that there's some way that you can alleviate that concern?
I think that in our lifetime, I don't think that that's a legitimate concern for most areas. Like for 95, 96% of the areas, no one's going to put a condo building on a cul-de-sac. That's economically, it doesn't make sense, right? I also wouldn't buy a giant mansion in Upper Mount Royal and throw up a condo building like that. You're not going to make any money on that. And ultimately, developers are business people. They would like to make some money. It's not about putting up housing and walking away and, I did my good deed. I do think, though, that there definitely needed to be better engagement. And I think that lack of engagement is showing in, I won't say a lack of understanding of a guidebook, but I think there's it's different interpretations of one document. And I think if there had been better, more cohesive engagement with communities, stakeholder groups, I think everyone's not going to be happy, but I think we could have been closer to having everybody feel a little more confident in it. Because right now, uncertainty breeds rumors, breeds misunderstanding. And I think that's exactly where we're at right now. And I think the city could have done a better job, I think, at helping some of those, especially some of those older R1 communities that have covenants and things like that. I think there could have been maybe better language to give them more certainty that there isn't going to be a condo building going up across the street from their bungalow that they've lived in for 30 years.
I think this is what has people concerned. It seems like the last 10 years, the city's been a bit at war with the development community, and there's been this dispute over, do you build up and densify, or do you build out? And both of those are questions of affordability, because a lot of first-time home buyers, young families, they're able to get their first home because they're able to live in one of the outlying suburban areas. You can also talk about affordability if you've got new multifamily homes within inner city communities that can be affordable as well. How do you see that balance?
It is just that, it's a balance. You can't have too much at the edge of the cities. Like, it needs to be sustainable, like anything. There needs to be sustainable. And I don't necessarily even mean in the environmental sense, but just, can we keep this up and can we keep this going? But absolutely, we need to add density to existing areas. I live in Oak Ridge. It's a 50-ish-year-old community, very much an R1 community. There's a little bit of multifamily. I live in one of the little bits of multifamily. But there's edges of our community that I think really could use a boost. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but a few years ago, Calgary Co-op was trying to do some redevelopments on parcels of land where they have stores. And what they wanted to do, it was stores that were ending their sort of near the end of their life cycle. What they wanted to do was add some density above the stores. And so have their store with some housing on top, possibly some, commercial, that sort of thing. So it would be truly mixed use, which on some of those, as they would call them, corner nodes, kind of major intersections in older communities like this, it would add so much life. And I mean, you have a grocery store there that closes at 10 and, the parking lot's empty. Who knows what's happening, in the sort of dark corners of the parking lot. Like, I think it just adds a vibrancy to the community. And I know I worked for the developer that was working on that. I know when we were doing community outreach, there was a lot of seniors that were thrilled with the idea that maybe there'd be somewhere that they could, right size or downsize, but stay in their communities where their friends are, where they've had their single family home for the last 30, 40 years. And they could still play tennis at the tennis club, and they could still be a part of the community association, and they wouldn't have to move, to a new community because that's where they could find an apartment that they would want to live in. So I think it's a balance of both. And I think we're out of balance with that. I think, on one hand, we say, oh, well, we don't want sprawl at the edge of the city. And when I say we, the city sort of collectively doesn't want any more sprawl at the edge of the city. But then at the same, and a lot of residents feel that way too, but then at the same time, we don't want to add density to our communities. And so something's got to give, right? Like we have to find that balance. And I do think it's a challenge, but I think I think more people are recognizing right now that we're sort of at a standstill where something's got to give either way, right? So yeah, I think that will be a big thing for the new council to look at, and for administration to sort of really focus on getting some clear messages out there. And the development world, there are some developers that play in both spaces, and I'm sure that their heads are spinning sometimes because it's, we don't want this and we don't want that, but we want you to submit your plans, and it's frustrating for people because, again, it's having that certainty, right?
Yes. Let me ask you about communication, because the project you described was an immediate aha, of course that makes sense. Even though you think of Oak Ridge as being R1 single family homes, that project would be a perfect project to have there. And that, I think, is maybe one of the issues, is there is a communication challenge. And I don't know if it's that the administration just continues along thinking that everybody is following their work, and then all of a sudden, bam, the community's totally surprised. I don't know if that's a failure in the councilors to be able to communicate that. Tell me a little bit about how you see the City of Calgary's communication problems.
I think in development issues like that, I think there's communication failures, in fairness, pretty much all the way around. The way that the policy is set up now is, let's say you use that co-op example, it would need a land use change, right? So you need to circulate that with the community to get the land use change. But the land use typically comes before a development permit is submitted. So land use is just, I want to change this from a grocery store zoning to housing, mixed use, whatever land use you would need for that. So when you take that out to the community, they're like, well, yeah, but what's it going to look like? How tall is it going to be? And that's all determined at the development permit stage. So right there, the policy is setting everybody up for confusion and mistrust and all that sort of thing, right? Because do you want to say, yeah, sure, go ahead, and not know what something looks like? And they don't always know that they will get that ability to revisit things when the development permit goes through. But, a lot of people, well, I want to know what it looks like now. But if the developer puts out at that land use stage what it's going to look like, then people also get worked up because they haven't been consulted. So, I think it sets a lot of people up. And I think the city should recognize that and do a better job, again, of maybe creating some guidelines about this is what engagement looks like. And this is when you go out to the community. I know I found in talking to developers, on one hand, the city wants you to do engagement, but they won't tell you what suitable engagement looks like. They're like, you just figure it out. And then when you go to submit the application, the city's like, oh, well, you didn't do enough. So it's like, it's kind of, I don't know, playing hard to get. I don't know what it is, but
boy. You've just articulated that there's going to be a lot of problems over the next few years as people try to sort their way through this new process. Let's talk about some of the other challenges that, of course, the city is going to face on the budget side. And I want to get your sense of how you think things are going on the spending side. Do you think they're spending about the right amount, too much, too little?
I think in some areas there's still room to tighten the belt. I'm not sure entirely what all those areas are, but I do think you can always find efficiencies. I know a number of people that work for the city, and they would say the same thing as, just sort of general employees, that there's ways that things could be streamlined, where there's duplication of efforts. So I think in some areas, absolutely, there's not just belt tightening, but I think finding new processes that are going to make things more efficient, automating some things. We learned a lot through COVID that automation is possible in a lot of areas. So, they're doing video inspections and things now, which doesn't involve necessarily a person going out and all that drive time and things like that. So I think, we can take some learnings from this pandemic thing and apply that to making our processes leaner. I do think certain departments and certain city partners are probably as lean as they can get without, damaging their operation or damaging their effectiveness. So I don't think, a 5% cut or 7% cut across the board is the right way to go, because you're going to hurt some who have worked really hard to get as lean as possible. I think you just need to look at where there's still that fat to trim and not just have it be a sweeping percent across the board. So I do think that there's room for improvement there for sure.
What about the, wages, benefits, pensions? Do you think that needs another look at it?
I think areas of wages for sure. I know we do want to be competitive. I know right now, obviously, the private sector isn't as robust as it maybe was, 5-6 years ago. But that said, there's a cost to recruiting too. So if the economy was to pick up in the next couple of years and that private sector starts pulling away a lot of city employees at a certain level or a certain type of specialized city employee, then it's costing $50,000-$60,000 to recruit or fill a position like that. So you have to find that balance, and I think you do have to somewhat reward employee loyalty. That said, though, I know there's some positions where I'm like, what is that job and why does it pay that much? So again, if it is that specialized and it is that important to the city, they need to do a better job of justifying why they're paying that. And we could always look to see, like, are there 5 people doing this one job that could really be 3 people? And then that comes to streamlining those processes and making sure that we have the right people doing the right jobs.
Now, the current incumbent in Ward 11, Jeremy Farkas, moving on to run for mayor. One of the things that he really pushed was trying to take a closer look at council wages. So reducing council wages, reducing severance, addressing the issue of pensions. Think on the idea that if you could do those things, you would get some credibility when you were going into negotiations with the unions. Do you think it was the right target? Do you think he was focused on the right things?
I think that I think it's always good to look at everything across the board. I don't know enough about the pensions. I don't think that there should be duplicate pensions. I'll say that right now. But I think if the pensions, or there's some sort of a retirement savings plan or something that is equivalent to a similar type position in the private sector, you are taking, as a counselor, you are taking 4, 8, however many years, where you're sort of diverting where you're going professionally. And I think to not have an option of maybe even RSP matching or something, like, does it need to be a traditional pension, which I know are very expensive to manage? Probably not. I mean, you don't see a lot of those in the private sector anymore. I think there should be, comparable benefits. I don't think, I don't think you need to have like the absolute top benefits out there in the world. But I do think the compensation, though, in terms of salary, is relatively fair given the amount of hours that a counselor does put in. Like you're working 60, 70 hours a week. And if you take that salary down, that it's not a lot in the realm of what you would be making at a comparable job with comparable hours in the private sector.
Okay, so let's talk about the other side of the ledger on the tax side. Do you think the tax levels are too high, too low, or about right?
So we obviously have a tax problem. I think we've seen what's happened with the downtown and the fact that we've lost revenue there. It's put us in a spot where we're backed into a corner. And if we take more from the commercial side of things, we're going to be even less competitive from a market than we currently are, if that's possible. And then I also don't think that most residents can really stomach or handle more of an increase too. So I think the whole system needs a revamp. Like if you were just a general company, if one of your main revenue streams wasn't working for you anymore, you would very quickly need to find another way of doing that. And so I think we do need to work with the province to figure out, how do we make this work? Because it clearly worked fantastic in good times. But if it doesn't work when you're at your kind of lowest point, you have an issue. So I don't think it's a case of, is it too high? Is it too low? I think what we're hearing from people is that they feel like they're paying too much. In some cases, they feel as though they're paying too much for what they're getting service-wise or what they use. So, I think if we could hold steady while we figure out, does the system work, that would probably be best case scenario. I'd be lying if I said, oh yeah, no problem, we could slash taxes in half or lower your taxes by 10. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to lie and say, hey, you know what, we'll lower your taxes and have no impact to services, because that's not reality, right? Like, we have to figure out how we're going to pay for things, but we also have to figure out, how do we have a model that's sustainable and scalable as we grow and as we go through these ebbs and flows in the economy? Because otherwise we're just putting a Band-Aid on it, and we're going to have the same problem next year and the same problem the year after that. And 4 years from now, we could be having the exact same conversation unless we fix the root of that problem.
So if property taxes are the problem and the sort of the shift around, because as you point out,
Yeah.
the first tax shift was downtown to the small businesses in the outlying areas, and that was unsustainable. Then they're talking about a shift to residents, and residents don't want that either. Do you have an appetite for any new taxation powers? The city charter discussion has been centered around, does City of Calgary get new taxation powers? There was a report last year that talked about potential new revenue sources from user fees and taxation. Do you think that's the solution?
I don't know if that's a solution. I think that's something worth looking at. But again, we also don't want to just keep passing things around, right? Like that's what we saw with the taxes by shifting them to small business in the outlying area. That didn't work. And, I think, as I said, residents, I think a lot of them are fed up with their tax bills now. So I think saying, hey, we're going to fix that by charging you taxes over here with a different color, that's not necessarily going to solve it. I think it's, you kind of have to open the books up, see what our options are, see what our maybe options could be, either through working with the provincial government or, establishing something through whatever charter powers we have to do so. I don't know. And I'm not going to say that I have it all figured out because, again, it's not a silver bullet solution. If it was, I think somebody would have done it by now because I don't think anybody enjoys people being this unhappy.
Well, and it is a big problem. Do you have some thoughts on what to do about downtown vacancy? I think it's been quantified this way for me that we have enough empty space that you could have 100 to 140,000 employees recruited. What do you think? What do you think needs to be done for downtown?
Well, I think we need to, again, we have to shift the way we're thinking. I don't think downtown is going to fill up with, workers anytime soon, both because we've learned things through the pandemic and that we can work from home and that a lot of people are more productive working from home. Obviously, the economy, the energy market has shifted greatly too. So I think, the types of employees that would be filling those buildings downtown is going to be a little bit different. I think it is a multifaceted problem that is going to take all hands on deck to fix. So I really like the fact, I know there's a lot of private sector people who have, a stake in what happens downtown, property owners, sort of major businesses down there. And I really like that they're working together alongside the city. The city kind of has their plan that they're putting together, but then there's also these private sector people, because I really do think the solution lies in a private-public partnership. I don't think the city can do it on its own. I don't think there's going to be appetite as much as it could help for people seeing the city spend a whole lot of money on their own to build things and change things around and, revitalize things. I really do think it needs to be that partnership with people who have a vested interest in that downtown thriving with the business owners and really collaborating and coming up with a solution. Because if it's just one side leading it, again, I don't think there's going to be buy-in. I don't think it's going to have that success rate. So I've sat in on a couple of meetings where I've heard city people talk about their plan, and then the private sector are also there, and their plan is very similar and they intersect, but there is some independence to it. And I think really that's the way to go.
Can I ask you one more thing about that? Because one of these city's approaches has been to try to attract businesses with direct grants, like through the Calgary Economic Development, $100 million. Do you think that's the right approach?
No would be my short answer. I think it's not just about incentives, right? I mean, most of the time, companies that are looking to expand or establish, regional headquarters, that sort of thing, having a little bit of a bonus is nice, but we need to have a city where people want to live. We need to have a city people see opportunity. If we're going to open an office and maybe import some new employees and then hire some local, they have spouses, they have kids, they have other people in the family that aren't necessarily going to be working at those places, and they need to love where they live, and they need to have amenities that they want to enjoy. And I think that's really why, as much as Ward 11 is not going to touch downtown anymore, it still is a Ward 11 issue, because when you have a hollowed out downtown that's struggling, you can't just turn a blind eye and be like, well, that's not us, that's them over there, right? Because it's affecting us. It's affecting our taxes. It's affecting how people view our neighborhoods and if they want to stay here. So I don't think throwing a bonus is really going to change. That's from what I understand. I don't think that's going to make or break a company coming here. Like, oh, there's no bonus, even though I love everything else, I'm not coming. Like, that's not happening.
Well, let's talk then about, that's probably a good transition to get into the capital side of the budget, because part of what I think Calgary was trying to do is create some of those attractions to bring business and people here, but then you're always running up against a money crunch. So let's talk about a few things. First, let's talk about Green Line. And it initially started off as a tri-party deal, $4.5 billion, 40 kilometers. It would stretch deep south, deep north, and it was supported pretty well across partisan lines at all levels of government. And now it does not stretch deep south or deep north. It's over budget already before it's even started. And you've got the transportation minister saying it doesn't even connect into the existing system. So this is a big problem. If you inherit this problem, what would you do about it?
It's another tough one. We have a lot of tough ones this go around. So I will say that I am generally a pretty big supporter of transit. I think it's an integral part of a thriving city. I have lived in parts of Toronto that have been greatly underserved by mass transit routes. I went to York University, and fortunately, I lived near the university, so it worked out for me. But anybody who didn't was taking like a subway, 2 buses, an hour and a half, 2 hours for a 15-20 minute drive away. And that was because they didn't have that foresight to extend the subway line up to York before a lot of that got built up. And now it would be so astronomically costly to do that they just can't do it. And it would be very disruptive to residents, businesses, and all that sort of thing. So it really can't happen unless some sort of magic technology allows that to happen. So I don't want to see that happen to Calgary. But then that said, I feel like they've whittled the plan for the Green Line down so much. And I don't know if that's why there's less government support from other levels now, or if it's just because of what's happened with the economy and COVID, but it just feels like it's not doing what it was intended to do in the beginning. And I think people have lost confidence in the project. I do think it was a good project to start out with, but I'm not sure if, as it's laid out now, I don't know, like if the governments were to turn around tomorrow and say, oh, you know what, we were wrong, here's all your money, you still have to address the fact that, yeah, there's been a lot of money spent and we haven't broken ground yet. So I'm not sure what the solution is to that. I think it's an important investment in the long-term growth of our city, but it can't really be at a huge expense for people today. So it's how do we balance that out?
Well, and so let's then talk about some of the other projects, because there is a limit to the amount of money that can be spent. And in fact, when these 4 projects got put forward, the CFO even said, we can't afford to do all 4 of them. We can only do one, but council agreed to all 4 anyway. So the event center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion for convention space, the Arts Commons transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. So do you think the city or the council made the right decision to go ahead with all of those?
I'm not even sure, just from a staffing perspective, how you would manage 4 projects of that size with the current city resources. And we obviously don't want to add significantly more staff, right? Those are 4 very large projects. Do I think the projects have merit? Yes. I mean, they all would bring a different type of a value to the city. They are all things that, you know, when completed, would be something that make a city that people do want to live in. Doing them all at once, like I said, I don't know, not even just from a budget perspective, but just from a people perspective, like how do you have all that on the go, plus all the regular planning stuff that's happening in the city, plus all the other things that the city's always working on too. I just think we're biting off more than we can chew, maybe. And maybe if there was more of what I think we need is maybe more of a long-term vision with some key milestones. So, and I'm just throwing this out there, you know, maybe we start with the event center and then we get that to a certain point where it's starting to bring in revenue. And then we use some of that revenue to invest in the next one. And it's sort of that domino effect rather than, you know, trying to boil the ocean and do everything all at once. You're not going to do a great job of it.
So if you had the choice to make and only could choose one, would that have been the one that you would have prioritized first, the event center with the Flames?
I think either the BMO expansion or the event center with the Flames. You know, I know redeveloping that whole area will do a lot for the city and again for the core. And I do think, I don't know, it's hard to say. I mean, the BMO expansion makes us a better place, I think, for conventions and a lot of events and stuff in its own right. I think the event center also does the same thing, but for different types of events. So I do think that if you were going to do two at once, those would be the two to do at once. But I think, yeah, it'd be one of those two, because I think there's a more immediate return on investment, because you'll see people, assuming COVID goes away, you'll see people coming and using that. It isn't seasonal, like the field house and some of that stuff is a little bit more seasonal. So I think, and it's a little more niche in terms of who would use it. Whereas I think the convention and the event center, it's great for current Calgarians, but it also brings a lot of visitors too. So, which we need.
All right. Perfect. Let's just talk about a few other issues that have come up in other interviews I've done. Snow removal. I think it came to a head in December. Are you hearing about that from constituents?
Yeah. I mean, again, Ward 11 has a lot of older communities, not the oldest, but we're certainly not, spry communities. And I think there were a lot of routes where people were surprised, because in previous years they've had better snow clearing. I know some of the newer communities on the edge of the city, they're used to not having great snow clearing, but I think there's a lot of people here who are like, wait, what? We had way better last year. Like, we were down to the bare pavement, and this year I don't think we saw a plow on our street, and we're a fairly busy street. So I think it's hit and miss where you are in the ward. I live on a snow route, bus route, and I'll be honest, like, my street has been great. There's been no issues. But then every once in a while I turn down a side street, around the corner from my house, and what is happening here? So I'd be interested in understanding what the plan was this year and why it seemed to go so different than previous years. Was it a budget thing? Were we trying something new and it just didn't work out? I don't know. Because that really impacts your day to day. And I think the city is responsible for making sure Calgarians are safe and able to go about their day to day. And most of us were at home too. So imagine if we weren't. Imagine if we were all out on the roads. Like, I think that would have been a much different story. So yeah, I think I'd be really interested in understanding what was different this year than previous years, because there was certainly a difference.
Let me ask you about the potential for contracting out or privatizing, maybe in the case of snow removal, but other areas as well, like golf courses or garbage collection. Generally speaking, do you think that's a good approach or not?
I think in certain areas, if it's something that's not in the city's wheelhouse, or it shouldn't be in the city's wheelhouse, it's worth looking at. Again, you always need to have the business case. This is going to give us a better return on investment or a better savings long term, like not just short term. I think sometimes we make decisions based on, it'll save us this much money next year, but over 5 years, it's actually going to cost us. So I think we really need to have a good understanding of what that looks like. And I think, we have pretty high expectations as a city, I think, of what our services will look like. Like, we want really good snow removal, and we want things to be repaired quickly, and we want a responsiveness from the city. So I think if we are going to contract out, we have to make sure that we can maintain that level of service, but at a cost savings. Otherwise, we're just pushing that burden around.
All right. Let me talk to you about frontline services, police, fire, and EMS. First of all, the defund the police movement that happened last year, the notion behind it was to take a portion of the police budget and put it towards alternative service providers to aid in calls for mental health and addiction. Do you support that approach?
So I'm very supportive of the police. My stepdad's he's retired now, but he's a retired fire captain. Like, I know what they put in. I've heard lots of stories. He's back in Ontario, but I'm sure they're very similar here. I think what it comes down to is when, you or somebody you care about needs some kind of an emergency service, you want the right person or the best person to help you to show up, whether that's, the fire department for a fire, or, EMTs if there's a medical issue. I think the police have a lot to do with their budget. And I also know that there's a lot of police that say, like, some of those mental health services are not in our wheelhouse. We are not the best. Like, maybe we can triage, we can be the first people there and say, okay, wait, we need somebody who's more skilled at this, or something that they can deal with. I think rather than just, taking budget away from them and giving it to I don't know who you'd be giving it to, like, I guess some sort of a social service. I think that's something that really needs to be a partnership-based decision. I know the police were looking at, like, how do we do this? Like, do we bring more mental health professionals into the police services fold? Do we, contract that out? And, there's a different way of dispatching those mental health professionals in certain cases. I think everybody needs to have a voice at that table rather than just, pulling some funding over here and giving it over there. Like, again, you need a cohesive plan for that to work. And I think the police department isn't perfect. The fire department isn't perfect. I think there's definitely some improvements they need to make in terms of, how they deal with some racial issues and things like that. But I also think that they have a tough job, and I don't think we know the half of it, sitting out here in our houses, and, we're safe. And when we call 911, we expect that somebody's going to come and help us. And I think we need to have confidence in the people that are doing that for us.
Did you take a position on the issue of centralized EMS dispatch? The city was upset about that centralization.
No, I listened to that, and I, tried to get a good understanding of that. Again, I think, we need whatever is going to help people the most and have the least room for error in cases like that. You don't want people going to the wrong place. And you want to know the right people are going to show up to help that person that you care about. When you're calling 911, chances are you're not having a great day for whatever reason you're calling. So you need to make sure that those people who need to get to you, get to you. And so if that's a centralized system is the best way to do that, great. If it's another system, then okay. But what's the best system to help people?
All right. I want to ask you just a couple of questions about the role of the elected member versus how much autonomy you give to individual citizens to decide things directly. Because the council could have put 2 referenda questions forward, one on fluoride and one on the reduction of residential speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. They made a decision on the speed limits to reduce them, but they decided to put the fluoride question to a referenda. Do you think that was the right decision on both those cases?
I think it's important that there is a balance between what I think and the expertise that I bring to the table, and what the faith people have instilled in me as a potential counselor. People don't necessarily want a referendum on every issue, but I do think, again, when the public is saying that they want something, I think there's a duty to listen to it. I don't know if we necessarily always need to jump, but I think you have to listen and hear and understand why. And again, I think a lot of the time stuff like that comes down to a lack of communication. And I think if people had a better understanding of the issues and why council is leaning a certain way or why their counselor is leaning a certain way, and they had access to the same data that the counselors do to make those decisions, I think there'd be more trust there. And I think there'd be, if there was more accountability from that counselor to their constituents and more transparency, I think, again, it's that trust, right? And if I'm open and honest with people, even if they don't agree with my decisions, but I've given them my rationale and I've given them the information I use to make that decision, they're at least going to know that I've put thought into it. I've listened to as many people as possible. And so, again, I think it comes down to that communication factor and making sure that we are building that trust with constituents and we are giving them the information that they need to know. And then if they have all the facts in front of them and they still believe that, having a separate vote of the citizens is the best way to go, then, we need to look at that. A lot of the time, though, that's non-binding. So then, again, I think it sets people up for the wrong expectations because, we say one thing, but then we still might do another because there's nothing legally binding about it, which also, again, creates trust issues.
Well, then let's just one last question for you, because I think these kinds of issues come up a lot where what your constituents want you to do might be in conflict with what the City of Calgary administration says is best for the city as a whole. So if you found yourself in that situation where the advice of administration was one thing, but your constituents wanted you to do the other, what would you do?
I'd first, like I said, I would make sure the constituents actually know what that advice was from the city and what it was based on and where it's coming from. And then see if that changes the opinion. And then, really I have to weigh what I'm hearing from the bulk of my constituents, not just necessarily the loudest voices or the ones you hear from all the time, but like really getting a good sense of how people are feeling. And then, and factor in also my knowledge and my understanding of the situation, and make a decision that is what I feel, at least in the moment with what I have in front of me, the best decision for my people, or my ward, and the city as a whole, but it's sort of my ward first and then the city.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You got it. That is your Ward 11 candidate, Lauren Herschel.